In Japan, there's a category of land the government legally requires sellers to disclose before anyone is allowed to buy it, not because of what happened inside a house, because of what the ground itself might still do. They're called Tokutei Keikai Kuiki, special hazard zones, addresses officially marked as capable of killing someone again someday without warning. Some of them look like a hot spring resort. Some of them look like a shrine on a hiking map. Some of them look like nothing at all, just a stretch of asphalt with a bend in it. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the people who actually live near some of these zones don't use the government's term for them. They use an older one, Oni no Basho, places where a demon lives. And unlike most ghost stories, more than half of these are places you can book a hotel room 50 feet from tonight. Number 11. Onigajo, the Demon's Castle, Kumano, Mi Prefecture. We start with the one that gave itself away in its own name. Onigajo is a run of sea cliffs on the Kii Peninsula, carved by centuries of Pacific storms into walls, towers, and hollow caves that from the right angle genuinely read as a fortress rather than erosion. The version of the story locals still repeat says an Oni, a bandit demon, used those caves as a hideout, raiding the coast for years until Imperial soldiers finally cornered it inside its own walls and drove it out for good. Here's what's real and separate from that story. Human remains have been recovered from inside the cave system over the decades, some of them, by local museum records, old enough that they predate any written account of who might have been living there. Fishing families in the area avoided the water directly beneath the cliffs after dark for generations, which is worth sitting with, because these were people whose income depended on knowing every rock in that bay well enough to fish it blind. Here's the disclosure this channel always makes when a legend gets this old. No official record confirms an actual bandit, demon, or otherwise ever operated out of these caves as a base. The rock formation is protected today as a natural monument inside a UNESCO-listed national park, walkways built directly through some of the larger caverns. What isn't disputed is that visitors who scramble past the barriers for a closer photo have needed rescue often enough that park rangers now log it as its own recurring incident category on their annual safety report. The demon is folklore. The rescue calls are paperwork, filed every single year. Number 10. Kurogari Pass, the Dark Pass, on the border of Nara and Osaka prefectures. This one is documented in a completely different way, by engineers rather than folklorists. Kurogari Toge has been the mountain route connecting Nara and Osaka since at least the 7th century, and the name, meaning dark even at midday, comes from tree cover so dense that daylight barely reaches the road surface at noon in summer. During the Edo period, magistrate records list it as one of the most dangerous roads in the region. For an entirely human reason, bandits used the blind switchbacks to ambush travelers moving goods between the two cities, and the killings show up in local court documents, not just campfire stories passed down without paperwork behind them. What makes it stranger today is the modern engineering data layered on top of the old fear. Kurogari is now officially recognized as one of the steepest paved public roads in Japan, with sections reaching close to a 37% gradient, steep enough that automotive magazines and driving forums list it among the country's most punishing legal drives on physics alone. No folklore required. Locals still pass one instruction to anyone attempting it for the first time, and they pass it seriously, not as a joke for tourists. Never stop the car partway up the climb, whatever you see at the edge of your headlights. Multiple drivers over the decades have independently reported the same detail. A figure standing at the tree line that's gone the instant their lights swing around on the next switchback. The official explanation is the road's own geometry, the sharp turns playing tricks with headlight beams against dense foliage. The rule about not stopping predates headlights by roughly 200 years, which is a strange thing for an optical illusion to have anticipated. Number 9. Onigashima, Demon Island, Megajima, Kagawa Prefecture. Population under 200 people, and underneath a good part of that population sits a cave system nobody has ever fully explained. It's man-made. That part is confirmed by every geological survey done on it, chambers cut directly into solid rock and connected by corridors, extensive enough that walking through it feels less like a quarry and more like touring a fortified stronghold built to be defended from the inside. Local tradition identifies this specifically as the Demon Island from the Momotaro folktale, the one the hero sails to in order to defeat an army of Oni and free the villages they'd been raiding. And the island has leaned hard into that identity commercially since at least the 1970s, complete with a giant demon statue at the ferry dock, which is exactly the kind of detail that should make you skeptical of the whole thing before you've even set foot on the boat. The disclosure here matters more than most. The official archaeological explanation is that the caves were quarried for construction stone, likely sometime during Japan's medieval period, and that explanation is generally accepted in academic surveys of the site. It also doesn't fully account for the corridor layout, which archaeologists who've mapped the system have described in published surveys as unusual for what should have been a straightforward stone quarry with no defensive purpose. Tour guides walk visitors through daily and tell the demon story with a smile, treating it as exactly what it appears to be: a good story wrapped around a genuinely strange piece of unexplained engineering. According to multiple visitor accounts posted over the years, not one of those same guides has ever agreed to stay inside alone after the site closes for the evening, smile or no smile. Number 8. The hidden caves above Oga, Akita Prefecture. Once a year, on the night of December 31st, men in straw costumes and carved demon masks come down from the mountains on the Oga Peninsula, force their way into homes with the family's advance permission arranged beforehand, and demand loudly to know if there are any misbehaving children inside. This is Namahage, and in 2018, UNESCO formally recognized it as intangible cultural heritage, one of Japan's officially protected traditions, filmed by tourism boards, staged for cameras, entirely safe for the children involved. What tourists usually aren't told is where the tradition actually started, and it isn't a metaphor either. Local records describe real caves in the mountains above these villages, where, historically, outcasts and people pushed out of the community by illness or crime lived through the winter with no other shelter, coming down when they had no other option to take food from villagers by force, sometimes violently. Several of those caves are still there today, largely unmapped, accessible only by hiking trails that most tourism maps don't bother marking. Older residents still call them Oni no Ie, demon houses, and by multiple local accounts collected by folklore researchers, they don't say it as a joke or a tourist hook. Cavers who've attempted to fully survey the system in the last 2 decades have reported collapsed sections and passages that don't match maps drawn by previous expeditions only a few years earlier. Discrepancies large enough that at least one survey team abandoned the project rather than reconcile them. Nobody has published an explanation for why the maps keep disagreeing with each other. The mountain keeps the caves. The caves, according to the people who've actually tried to chart them, apparently keep changing. Number 7. Jigokudani, Hell Valley, Noboribetsu, Hokkaido. The name is on official maps, not folklore, because the valley is a live volcanic crater that happens to sit inside a resort town's front yard, steaming through dozens of active sulfur vents where the ground is, in the literal and not metaphorical sense, close to boiling in several sections. The Ainu, Hokkaido's indigenous people, mapped this valley as the border between the world of the living and the world of demons long before any hot spring hotel existed on the site, and traditionally would not let children near the crater rim without a shaman physically present to keep them back. Today, there are boardwalks and steel guardrails threaded through the whole valley, and the signs telling visitors not to leave the marked path aren't about protecting the view. They're there because a thin mineral crust in several sections sits directly over mud, hot enough to cause serious burns within seconds of contact. Local fire and rescue services confirm publicly that they respond to incidents involving visitors who stepped past the barriers most years, chasing a better photo of the steam. Though the Valley Authority doesn't publish a running total of exactly how many. Every guide gives some version of the same line before the walk starts, delivered flatly, not for effect. This isn't a metaphor. Hell is under your feet here, and it's currently active, and it does not care that there's a gift shop at the entrance. Number 6. Rendaiji, the resort that emptied itself, Izu Peninsula, Shizuoka Prefecture. In the 1960s, this was one of the trendiest hot spring destinations in the entire country. Dozens of high-rise hotels built shoulder to shoulder up a hillside above the Pacific. Honeymooners and company retreats booked years in advance. By the 2000s, most of them had shut down within a few years of each other. A slow collapse driven by changing domestic travel habits and an aging Japanese tourism market that hit certain aging resort towns. Like this one especially hard, all at once, with no single company or scandal to blame it on. More than 20 fully abandoned multi-story hotels still stand in Rendaiji today. Windows broken out, ceilings collapsed into the hallways below them. Furniture and wall calendars from the late 90s still sitting exactly where they were left the day the last guest checked out. Prefectural police confirm they regularly deal with trespassers here, and several people who went in just to look have been seriously injured by structural failures that don't follow any predictable pattern. The buildings are still failing internally, unpredictably, decades after the last renovation. Residents old enough to remember the town alive won't go up the hill even in broad daylight, and when asked directly why, most of them don't mention the ruins at all. They mention the quiet instead, which they describe consistently across separate interviews as wrong for a place that used to hold that many people breathing and talking and running the hot water at once. Number 5. Aokigahara, the sulfur island of Satsuma, Kagoshima Prefecture. A small active volcanic island off the southern tip of Kyushu, where the ground is stained red with iron oxide and the air permanently carries the smell of sulfur from a crater smoking beside residential streets, not somewhere out in the wilderness, beside actual houses. Fewer than 100 people live there full-time, alongside a volcano they refer to only as it, never by name, the way you'd talk around a difficult relative rather than name them directly. The island's darker association in Japanese history is real and extensively documented, not folk memory. In the 12th century, the Buddhist monk Shunkan was exiled here after his role in a failed plot against the ruling Taira clan known as the Shishigatani Incident. And according to the Heike Monogatari, one of the foundational texts of Japanese literature, his 2 fellow conspirators were pardoned in a general amnesty 2 years later and sailed home. Shunkan was specifically left off the pardon list and died on the island, abandoned, starving himself according to some versions of the account. His story became so central to Japanese literature that the No Master Zeami wrote an entire play about it, still performed today, centuries later, on stages nowhere near the island itself. Geologists explain the red soil in perfectly straightforward terms: oxidized iron in volcanic rock, nothing more. That explanation doesn't account for a local practice that's persisted for generations. Regardless, residents have historically avoided establishing cemeteries on the island itself, and the dead are still, by multiple current accounts from island officials, more often transported to a neighboring island for burial instead of staying on the ground where they lived. Number 4. Tojinbo Cliffs, Fukui Prefecture. Basalt sea cliffs over 60 feet high and one of the highest concentrations of unexplained deaths of any single location in the country since detailed prefectural records began in the early 20th century. The legend says the cliffs are named for a corrupt monk thrown off them by his own followers centuries ago, and that he's been pulling people over the edge behind him ever since out of spite. What isn't legend is the human response that's grown up around that reputation. Authorities installed one of the only crisis phones anywhere in Japan, mounted directly on a cliff face, wired straight to a counseling line. A retired local policeman named Yukio Shige started walking the cliffs on his own time in the early 2000s, specifically watching for people standing too long, too close to the edge, and by the organization he eventually founded. He and his volunteers have intervened in several hundred documented cases over the years, later opening an actual halfway house nearby for people he'd personally talked down, so they'd have somewhere to go besides back to whatever they were leaving. Nobody in any official capacity has ever explained why this exact half-mile of coastline, out of dozens of nearly identical basalt cliffs running along the same shoreline, became the one people are specifically drawn to. Number 3. Kegon Falls, Nikko, Tochigi Prefecture. A 300-foot waterfall tour buses stop for because it's genuinely one of the most photographed natural sights in Japan, framed by autumn maple leaves on every postcard rack in the parking lot. Most of the people taking pictures don't know this same waterfall triggered what Japanese historians have directly referred to in academic writing as a suicide epidemic. In 1903, an 18-year-old student named Fujimura Misao carved a poem about the meaninglessness of existence into a tree beside the falls, a piece of writing still referenced in Japanese literature courses today, before jumping. The poem circulated nationally within weeks through newspapers eager for the story, and in the years that followed, a well-documented cluster of young people traveled specifically to that exact waterfall and did the same thing, in numbers significant enough that Japanese sociologists still cite Kegon Falls as one of the earliest recorded suicide clusters anywhere tied to a single physical location rather than a shared circumstance. Authorities eventually installed physical barriers and round-the-clock surveillance decades later. The numbers dropped substantially. They never reached zero. Shinto priests still perform purification rites at the falls on a recurring, scheduled basis. And it isn't for the tourists snapping photos from the viewing platform. Number 2. Mount Ontake, the mountain that took 63 lives in 7 minutes, on the border of Nagano and Gifu prefectures. Ontake had been an active pilgrimage site for centuries, thousands of climbers in white robes making the ascent every single year without serious incident. A mountain considered safe enough that families brought children on the climb. On September 27, 2014, in the middle of peak hiking season on a clear Saturday, the volcano erupted with almost no seismic warning and buried the crowded summit area in superheated ash and rock within minutes. 63 people died. It remains the deadliest volcanic disaster in post-war Japan, and it happened with hundreds of hikers standing at or near the crater rim at the exact moment it went off, phones out, taking photos of the view. What gets left out of most tellings is that Shinto tradition on Ontake had described its resident deity for centuries as two-faced, one side benevolent, the other destructive, with an explicit, specific warning passed down through generations of shrine keepers that it wakes without notice precisely when people stop being afraid of it. In the aftermath, bereaved families sued the Japan Meteorological Agency directly, arguing that a documented increase in minor seismic activity in the days before the eruption should have triggered a higher alert level, and didn't. A case that worked its way through Japanese courts for years afterward. A new monitoring system went up on the mountain after 2014. Pilgrims still climb it every single year. Guides now tell new hikers the story of the two-faced god inside the first 5 minutes of the trail, not as folklore anymore, but as an actual safety briefing. Number 1. Aokigahara, the village inside an active volcano. Izu Islands, Tokyo Prefecture. Technically part of Tokyo on every map and administrative document, though it sits roughly 220 miles south of the city. So remote, there's still no scheduled flight. Only a 9-seat helicopter that gets canceled at the slightest wind and sometimes doesn't run for days at a time. Fewer than 170 people live there, and every single one of them lives inside the crater of a volcano the Japanese government still officially classifies as active, not dormant, not extinct. At the bottom of that same crater, a geothermal vent is used today to cook food. a genuine tourist attraction listed in the island's own guide pamphlet, eggs and vegetables lowered into the steam in mesh baskets. In 1785, the volcano erupted catastrophically, killing roughly half the island's population at the time in a single event. Survivors were evacuated to neighboring Hachijojima and did not return for 50 years, an entire generation raised somewhere else entirely, believing the island might never be habitable again. When their descendants finally did come back in the 1820s, led by island records to a village official remembered today as Sakon Tazemon, town documents show they resettled in exactly the same place, inside the same crater, around the same vent that had nearly ended them, not somewhere safer elsewhere on the same island, of which there was plenty. The Japan Meteorological Agency still maintains an active monitoring station there today, because the eruption cycle is officially classified as unpredictable, not resolved, not something that got fixed with time. The people who live there understand that better than any volcanologist flying in for a week ever could. They just don't bring it up with the tourists riding down on the helicopter. There are places that hold on to what happened to them. And there are places that never stopped being dangerous, that people moved back into anyway, because it was still home, and because a name for the danger was easier to live beside than the danger itself with no name at all. Aokigahara is both of those things at once. So, in one way or another, is most of this list. The mountain, the cliff, the cave, the crater, none of them stopped being exactly what they are the whole time anyone was pretending otherwise. The people who stayed just decided to live there regardless, and gave it a name they could live beside. A demon, a hell valley, a dark past that predates headlights. Names are how you make a place bearable enough to stay in, generation after generation, long after anyone remembers exactly why the name was chosen in the first place. If you know a place like this near you, one people still won't fully explain even when you ask them directly. Leave it below. There are more of these than anyone has actually counted.